All right, Matt, what are the stats on this one?
Some stats. So Ramones-Ramones comes in at number 54 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 3 in 1976, number 215 of all time, and number 47 in Rolling Stone. These are 3 albums we've covered this week that are highly regarded in both Best Ever Albums and Rolling Stone. That doesn't happen very often.
No, it's true. All right, thank you for that. The Ramones. I'm not clear on the article, what's official or not. They formed in 1974 in Forest Hills, Queens. The 4 original members are John Cummings, a.k.a. Johnny Ramone, Thomas Erdelei, a.k.a. Tommy Ramone, Douglas Colving, a.k.a. Dee Dee Ramone, and Jeffrey Hyman, a.k.a. Joey Ramone. I will be referring to them by their pseudonyms from here on out. They formed, in Queens. Johnny and Tommy knew each other from high school and were in a band together. After a short-lived rehearsal where they had a 5th member who that turns out could not play bass, and they thought he could. They kicked him out, and then they became a foursome.
Sounds like Stuart Sutcliffe from the Beatles, right?
Yes.
He's the 5th Beatle, couldn't play bass, kicked him out.
Well, funny you should say that. It's not the last Beatles analogy here. Dee Dee Ramone was the first one to take on the Ramones name, inspired by Paul McCartney's use of the pseudonym Paul Ramone during the Silver
Paul
Beatles
Ramone.
days.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, I forgot about that.
That's where it comes from.
I didn't know that.
He is the one. Dee Dee Ramone is the one that convinced the other band members to also use Ramones names and make the band name Ramones. So at this point, there was only 3 of them in the band, and there was some shifting around in the lineup in terms of who was playing what instrument. Many of them realized they couldn't sing and play at the same time, so that kind of shifted where they were in the band. And then then Tommy Ramone joined the band. He was with Johnny Ramone in high school, and then he came in and joined the band when it turned out that he was the most talented member and actually could play the music the best. So he's also a primary songwriter on many of the Ramones albums and songs. They played together for the first time on March 30th, 1974, and at the same time, this was when the New York City music scene was popping off and centered on two the clubs that John mentioned before, Max's Kansas City and CBGB's. The Ramones debuted at CBGB on August 16th, 1974, and they played there 30 times by the end of the year. They performed with Blondie as well at one point in 1975, and their performances were short and fast, averaging 17 minutes a set in total.
That's a fucking
like 30
set right
songs,
there.
probably, right?
A lot of their songs are 2 minutes or less on this album, or close to it. They were signed to a recording contract in 1975 by Seymour Stein to Sire Records. He later became VP of Warner Brothers, but before then, as a tangent, he signed the Talking Heads, the Pretenders, Madonna, the Replacements, Depeche Mode, the Smiths, the Cure, Ice-T, the Undertones, and Echo and the Bunnymen. All wow.
That's like half of my album collection from
I know.
when I was coming of age. Yeah,
pretty stellar run. I didn't know the Undertones, but apparently they're a Northern Ireland band.
They're good.
Yeah, so
we'll cover them one time too in a cold listen hot take.
Nice.
Yep.
Okay, good. They recorded this debut album in February of '76 and released it April 23rd, 1976. Of the 14 tracks on this album, the longest is 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and it is produced by Craig Leon of Sire Records, and associate producer was Tommy Ramone, and it cost a grand total of $6,400 to make this record. And the Ramones have said that Craig Leon really went to bat for them and is responsible for them getting a recording contract. Also, as a short tangent, but I think is important, at this time in '75, Punk Magazine formed, which is a music magazine / fanzine of the underground rock scene in New York City. The term punk rock was coined by writers of Cream magazine a few years earlier, but this is really the magazine that made the term popular. It ran for 15 issues, and the Ramones were on the cover of the 3rd issue, and that had lead story. Lou Reed was on the first issue. Patti Smith was on the second. Iggy Pop was on the fourth, and many other people that we've talked about were in the other issues. Also, weirdly, there are no issues 9 and 13. They just skipped those numbers when they were making it, so I thought that was weird.
Well, 13's unlucky, right? You don't have 13 and floor 13 in hotels.
Yeah, but that doesn't apply to magazines, does it?
Well, maybe they're yeah.
I don't know. Initially, they wanted an album cover like the Meet the Beatles record, but it was quoted as coming out horribly, and I can only imagine what they looked like and what that album cover looked like. If you'll recall, Meet the Beatles is the album where they are all, it's in black and white, and it's a black background, and it's just their heads, for people who don't remember. This album cover that they ended up using has turned out to be very famous and showed the four of them in front of a brick wall and was photographed by Punk Magazine's Roberta Bailey.
Truly iconic, and not just in the loose way it's used now. Yes, but the true use of that word.
Everyone seemed to love this album upon release critically. Robert Christgau loved the album. Rolling Stones loved it. New York Times, NME, even Newsday loved it. However, it was not a commercial success and only charted 111 on the Billboard album chart. The two singles were Blitzkrieg Bop and I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, but neither charted. Importantly, historically, they went on to tour London July 4th, 1976, which was the bicentennial of America, and they were second billed to the Flaming Groovies, who we talked about way back when on a Cold Listen Hot Take. Mark Bolan was in the audience the first night they were there and was invited on stage. And the following night, they met the Sex Pistols and the Clash. So it was a real merging of punk rock music and history there.
And if memory serves, they got along pretty well with the Sex Pistols, didn't they? Right? No issues there.
Everything else I have is after this album, since this is the debut album. But I think it's fun, so I can talk about that after we talk about the album. And I know we talked about Rocket to Russia already, but what did you think of the debut album, Ramones?
All right, guys. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's you have to do that if you're going to do a Ramones album, I think. I had earlier said that I thought Rocket to Russia might be the best Ramones album, but the reason is because I always forget how awesome the first album is. Yeah. And the Ramones, Ramones is every 5 years you have to listen to this album, at least if you're me, as a palate cleanser, especially if you haven't listened to good music in a while. I don't really want to know people that don't like the Ramones, because I know who you are if you don't like the Ramones, and you're either boring with bad taste, or you're those insufferable people who want to do a long narrative about it's all just 2-minute songs, and I don't want to know those people either. You know what I mean? I really think I can sort who I want to talk to about music by, and to say this is not my favorite album in the world, right? But I don't know if there's a better album to sort people test one of do I want to talk music with you with how do you feel about because this album encompasses all of the intrinsic things about music that go beyond just the playing, right? It's it's the energy, it's the vibe, it's the sort of comic value of the lyrics I find to different stuff. I mean, Beat on the Brat is the example that jumps immediately, right? It's nonsense, but at the same time, it fits perfectly, and there's a weird profoundness to the minimalism of it. I don't know how to describe it, which is kind
very minimal.
with the Ramones are. I mean, they're, now I want to sniff some glue is another one that's hilarious. It's funny because it's subversive though, and it's kind of, I always thought the Ramones were they took 50s rock and the sound, and especially the Spectre sound, right? And while they're undeniably punk, right? They're if you took Phil Spector and you made him punk, in terms of certain elements of it, but if you also made Phil Spector minimalist. And I think later Phil Spector actually even works with the Ramones, right? Which is kind of the true hilarity. I think if I remember right, like he pulls a gun on one of them and stuff. It's kind of like a bad
that's the
vibe.
rumor. Yeah,
that's the rumor, right? Yeah, they never really talk.
Who didn't Phil Spector pull a gun on?
Yeah, but this is a particularly famous
he was
one.
a walking red flag, that Phil Spector.
Yes. So this is like Phil Spector after like the motorcycle crash, right? Which like basically turned him even anyway. So, but there's just I love the vibe. Joey Ramone. There's like an element of him that like you almost don't recognize how unique Joey Ramone is because he's so. You just know what he sounds like in retrospect, but when you're doing something like this, when you're getting to the Ramones in the context of where they're at, you clearly recognize, well, yeah, he's like, there's nothing like him. There's some other people, right, that kind of do this, but like him as a presence, and them playing shotgun 1 minute and 56-second songs, like the only things we've covered so far that are short are some of those garage rock songs, right, from the compilations, and they don't have most of those bits, they don't have Joey Ramone fronting them, right? Yeah. And, yes, the Ramones' chord structure and stuff is not complex, but as someone who plays the guitar told me once, try playing that fast for 25 minutes and then tell me these songs are easy, right? That's what I've always been told by people, to play like frantically for that long, And if you ever see a Ramones concert, right, they don't stop ever. It's just song done, and then it's 1, 2, 3, it's the next song, and then it's 1, 2, 3, and then it's the next song, and it's like they just go, and it's like the reason their concerts are like 17 minutes is because they absolutely never. It's like a 17-minute song, basically, but not in a bad way. Not in like a jam band way. More in like a variations of the theme. If you're the type of person that is looking for like a reinvention of the wheel musically, you're not going to get it here. But if you're looking for something that profoundly changed, like the vibe of music and as much as anything, and like I can't say this, if like you don't get the Ramones, I feel bad for you, because like you should, because it really, there's an element of them that is the joyful part of rock and roll for me. I'd also like to point out that this album, I mean, most people know like Blitzkrieg Bop, Beat on the Brat's pretty well known, but there's I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement is an awesome song. I'd like to point out it's and the lyrics are hilarious. Loudmouth is another one where it's basically like, shut up, you're a loud. It's like, yo, loudmouth. It's like kind of like it's perfect. You know what I mean? These songs are all right there. So
I'll put you up.
I'll go up, and they were always fighting, especially I think it's Johnny Ramone's constantly getting in fights and stuff. But yeah,
with other band members or other people?
With other people too. Like he was getting in fights with other band members, and I know he and Joey had a huge falling out over, I think, what became Johnny's wife later. I don't want to steal from Josh's thunder, but I know that.
I didn't read about that, yeah.
Yeah, it was like Joey dated her, and then Johnny didn't, and then there was a whole thing that they kind of fell out, and they played music, but they didn't really talk, and then I think famously he didn't... the Ramones, they all died young, too. Is like they're the opposite of Blondie. So, I love this album. Like, I don't really understand people that would say this album's under or overrated, because it's not. It's properly rated as being one of the most important rock albums of all time because of what it represented in terms of the style of rock, stripping it down and creating all of that, like, so simple that it's great ethos that's, once again, much like Elvis Costello's pop songs, is harder to do than you think it is, to be simple but great. Yeah, I love this album. High recommend for this one too.
Yeah, so I have, this is the one Ramones album that I do own, and I've had it for a while, and I do like it a lot, and I think John said a lot of stuff. It's amazing. Obviously the thing with them is the fact that they were kind of just going against all of the bloatedness of some of the prog rock bands, the quote unquote experimental band, the art rock people, the people that were really taking music seriously, like snobs and and people that were really kind of like classically trained and some virtuoso musicians, and look, God, I love all of that stuff. But then there was just this idea of, music doesn't have to be like that to be good. Music can just be.
Can I jump in real quick, Matt?
Like, okay.
Like, it's so funny that you say that, because all I was thinking was that, like, while Pink Floyd said that, like, when you think of like what the songs are about here, like I want to sniff glue and you're loud and I want your boyfriend and stuff, and then you think about like what Pink Floyd was trying to do on Animals, you know, in some ways it's like, and I don't think they made it to shit all over Pink Floyd. I don't think they had that guile, right? They just did their thing. But it is funny because we've covered those and they almost are at opposite ends, aren't they, in terms of what they were trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, and well, especially musically, I think with the Pink Floyd Animals album, which came out a year after this, I think, you know, that, and I think I don't know if it was so much the response to the Ramones, but I know that Roger Waters saw some type of, you know, kinship with people that were fighting against the system, you know.
Right. I remember you mentioning that's why I brought it up. Yeah.
But so some of the messaging there, I think, you know, politically speaking, they're on the same lines, but musically, it's the total opposite, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's something very refreshing about this because it's 3 chords, and sometimes in the songs, it's like, I'm like, that sounds like the very beginning of Blitzkrieg Bop. You know, it's like a different song, but it's like that's the same chord, and you're right. It's just dun 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 dun. I mean, and I can understand how that would be a difficult thing to do, even for 20 minutes, because it's got to be tiring. You know, even for the most seasoned musician, just to do that fast without taking a break is very challenging. So, I mean, it's just the refreshing nature of them, right? And what they inspired after that fact. So I do like the. I mean, Blitzkrieg Bop is an all-time, you know, classic song, and it's my favorite song on here. I think it's got the most. It's of the songs, of all the simplicity of these songs, that's the one that's got the most oomph for me. You know, the one that does the most. I think. I think I Want to Be Your Boyfriend's a really interesting song because it's totally like that's the one that kind of stands out a little bit where they actually do slow down and kind of do a little bit more of a. Yeah. It's not necessarily a ballad, but it's definitely you know, we're going to slow down and do something a little bit more. I don't know, say emotional, but like kind of a more of a love song type of thing, you know, or more of a serious song. And then they go, and now I want to sniff some glue, which always makes me laugh. It's not just the lyrics; it's also the way that Joey Ramone sings it. His voice is definitely, you know, it's certainly part of their sound and their vibe, and it's just he's funny, you know. He's just the way he does the voice, the vocals. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just it's this goofy nature of it, and it's funny. It's like you know, let's have fun. Let's just let's put all the pretense aside. Let's stop trying to take things so seriously, and let's just enjoy music for what it is. And I think that's their strongest suit. I will say was the one downside of this record is listening it alongside the other 2 that we've covered tonight. This suffers a little bit from the sameness, and I think I talked a little bit about that when we did Rocket to Russia. You know, this, John, on your scale of, you know, the whatever categories you have, the re-listenability on there, this is not an album that I would want to listen to a ton, at least not back to back. This album to me is a good, like, throw it on every now and then to kind of, like you said, cleanse your palate. But, you know, I do like the first half better. And I don't know if that's because I think probably the songs themselves I like better, but I also think that by the time the second half comes around, it does suffer a little bit from the sameness. You know, when we just talked about 2 albums that just did so much and always kept you interested and threw different things at you. This album doesn't really do that, and I don't think it needs to because I think it is exactly what it needs to be. But I'm just saying, like upon re-listenability, it's not as strong for me. But I also I can also understand its influence, though. I mean, to me. Yeah. The Ramones are the Ramones, and this is number whatever it is, 47 in Rolling Stone, and like, you know, one of their highest rated album and things like that. It's the history. It's what it represents. It's inventing punk essentially, right, and just spawning so much more that came after it. It's not.
They're also nice enough when they do an album that sounds similar that instead of like a shitty indie rock band and doing it for 47 minutes, they're like, we're going to give it to you, but it's going to be like 22 minutes.
It's 20 to 14 songs in less than a half an hour, you know. Yeah. So even if there's a song on here, you're like, it's going to be over in a second, you know. I will say one last thing. I do think that there's some cool parts in some songs, like Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue. There's a little guitar breakdown. It's not a solo because I don't think Johnny Ramone ever does a solo, but it's like they do like a heavier guitar part that's a little different and it only lasts like 8 seconds or something like that. But it's just enough to make you go, okay, that was kind of different. I like the end of Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World. It's kind of like they throw in a little bit of a different song in there, so they kind of mix it up a little bit there.
Nazis.
Yeah. So there's little bits and pieces here and there of like, so it's not like they're doing the exact same thing all through the song. So they do throw different parts in there, and I think when they do that, I do like that. I also like in Judy as a Punk when they do the second verse same as the first, yeah. And the third verse different from the first. It's a fun record, and they're great. So I'm a thumbs up on this.
Yeah, it's based on my reading and kind of understanding. It's hard to understate how what an influence and kind of how different they were and how different they felt when they came out. Where it was kind of like a bomb dropped off. Even though I see like a clear line from them to like the Velvet Underground, which is not that far removed from when they came out, but it seemed like, I saw one quote that said, they were all in black and played really fast, and that was like kind of unheard of, or like compared to everything else that was going on. It was like had never been seen before. So they are extremely influential in a way that I can't understand on some level. But I mean, I love this album. It's hard not to enjoy this album. It's everything I want in music on some level, because it's fast, it's fun, it gets in and out. I will agree with John. I think Rocket to Russia is a better album, and having listened to that first and comparing it to this, I think they do a little bit more and have grown some as artists, and I think there's some better songs on there. But I think everything that makes the Ramones is on here. I think they are a bit subversive. I think there are some surprisingly dark songs and kind of poignant songs. Like I picked Havana Affair because it's a pretty political song. It's a 53rd and Third, which Dee Dee Ramone wrote, is about a male prostitute. So, and he claims it's autobiographical. So, a male prostitute who lures someone in and then cuts their throat with a knife. So you have the fun stuff of Blitzkrieg Bop and Judy is a Punk and Beat on the Brat with a baseball bat and sniffing glue. And I don't want to go down the basement when they don't even say basement completely. I love their delivery and how they say words too. It's really funny. And so, yeah.
Also use of daddy-o in that, yes, which I always love. It's the rare time you see that. So
yep. And is their song writing, complex? No, it's pretty much like one verse repeated many times, and sometimes there's a second verse. But I think on some level it's very a visceral record. You pick up on what they're putting down immediately. You understand what the band is about, and I think they're accessible in that way. And I think you will get the energy and aggressive nature, and while also being kind of tongue-in-cheek and having fun with it, like Matt said. I think they are more indebted to maybe pop music and the past and some harmonies than a band like the Sex Pistols were, who, I think on some level the Ramones are more, you can sing along with them more and catch kind of the beat than. And the Sex Pistols, they're kind of a different energy, the Sex Pistols, and they're much
the Ramones were also like unrepentant fans of older music and mentioned that all the time, where the Sex Pistols' whole thing was like, we don't come from any fathers,
Right.
Like
Sex Pistols seem to have a fuller sound. Like, I don't know if it was more produced, but it was a bigger guitar, a fuller sound.
Yeah.
It's not just stripped down to the structure, but it's also a little bit, it's pretty basic, even though it's distorted. It's no bells and whistles at all, or not really any,
this kind of comes from garage rock, which is the same thing, where the Sex Pistols were sort of more garage rock evolved. Like New York Dolls always comes to mind a little bit for the Sex Pistols sound, kind of glam rock, right? Like elements that were there.
Yeah, there's definitely a thread from like early Kinks songs to the Ramones in some ways, and that garage rock sound, and the Beatles, clearly. I think they were influenced by the Beatles.
Or that whole like Artifacts album.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I'm with you, John. I feel like Ramones are on some level a band that everyone should like, and it would be weird not to like them, because they're just so not basic, but like foundational and primal on some level, that it would be hard to understand why you wouldn't like them, or at least, like some of their songs.
I think when you hit like 11 years old or 12, like I did, right, and you start to figure out like what music do you like if you like listen to the Ramones at that stage and you realize you like it, like the gateway of where you can go kind of is what leads you certain places. And I feel like if you don't get to the Ramones until you're like 25 or something, I could see how you wouldn't quite get it, because you'll have, but I almost feel like every 12-year-old who wants to know music like should hear the Ramones, because it really does serve as almost a perfect starter point for you to then go off in a lot of different directions. Because you could easily, Matt, like get to the Beatles from the Ramones in like 6 months, right? If you're listening, because you can. It's just advancing, complexity and stuff like that. You can easily get to a lot of different places from the Ramones.
They're just a foundation. Again, it's the foundation. They're just like it's three chords. It's the basic chord progressions that are melodic and catchy with a great beat behind it, and energy, and that's
it's like Homo erectus of music, and then like it builds up. That thing where you see like man come about. I feel like the Ramones are a necessary. Even though they're after some of the stuff, I feel like if you've got 60 years of pop music now, and if you're a 12-year-old right now, it's like listen to the Ramones first, and then you can see the stage of man, the ascent of man, right? Like from where the Ramones are is how I describe them. Yeah.
Yep. So to wrap up, do you guys have any final thoughts on the album before I give the rest of the bio on them?
I don't think so.
No, for God's sakes, if you haven't listened to this album, listen to it. It's like 21 minutes of your life. So
listen to this one and Rocket to Russia and Leave Home, which is the second album that they put out. Both Leave Home and Rocket to Russia came out in 1977. They were co-produced by Tommy Ramone and Tony Bon Jovi, the second cousin of John Bon Jovi.
Oh,
way.
Yep. Leave Home had even less success commercially than the first album, but Rocket to Russia reached 49 on the Billboard charts and had their first single to reach the Billboard charts at 81 with Sheena Is a Punk Rocker. Rockaway Beach was the second single and reached 66, the highest of any song that they put out. Tommy left the band in 1978, but stayed on as a producer. Mark Bell replaced him as Marky Ramone. You can see the trend here on their names. The album Road to Ruin came out in 1978 and had I Want to Be Sedated on it, which is probably their most famous song, I would say. The band made their
Bop, one of the two.
Yeah, one of those. The band made their movie debut in 1979 with the Roger Corman produced film Rock and Roll High School, which I highly recommend you check out. It's very entertaining, and the Ramones are make an appearance and sing some songs. Phil Spector crazily produced their 1980 album End of the Century.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
Then they had a compilation album, and their sixth album, Pleasant Dreams, came out in 1981 and was produced by 10cc's Graham Goldman.
Oh, wow.
So there's another connection there.
CTS connections all over the place.
Subterranean Jungle came out in 1983 and was their last album to crack the Billboard Top 100.
True story. That's the first Ramones album I ever heard.
Oh,
even before this one. Yep.
Okay. From 1983 to 1989, they shuffled members and continued to make albums. There was a Richie Ramone and an Elvis Ramone, who was Clem Burke, the drummer of Blondie. And then finally, there was a CJ Ramone. In 1992, they recorded an album called Mondo Bizarro, which went gold in Brazil. It was the first gold album they ever had. And then in 1993, they appeared on The Simpsons in the fourth episode of the fifth season, called Rosebud, and they were performing at Mr. Burns' birthday, and the clip's hilarious. I'm going to put it in at the end of the episode so you can listen to that. And they say, "I'd like to say this gig sucks. Up yours, Springfield." And then the last time all four of them, the original members, were together was at a Virgin Megastore autograph signing on July 20th, 1999. Joey Ramone died of lymphoma in April of 2001. The Ramones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2002, their first year of eligibility, and Green Day played 3 songs of theirs at the ceremony. And then sadly, Dee Dee Ramone was found dead in June of 2002 of a heroin overdose. And Johnny Ramone died in 2004, September, after battling prostate cancer. And on April 30th, 2014, this debut album was certified gold, selling 500,000 copies 38 years after its release.
That's amazing to me.
Wow.
They can sell 500,000 albums till
Boo
2004.
people.
I think I saw the first year it came out, it sold 6,000 copies. I think that was it.
Wow.
And then the final original member, Tommy Ramone, died in July of 2014 after battling cancer. And then finally, on October 30th, 2016, the band had an intersection of 67th and 110th Street in front of Forest Hills High School in Queens, named the Ramones Way. So their legend lives on. There's actually another street in New York City in the Bowery, also named after them. But their influence is long lasting.
They have 2 high schools, the Ramones named that. It's just, they're rock and roll high school, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah.
There was also I did see a video clip from like, I don't know, it was 2014 or something like that, where there was a punk rock, I don't know, summit or something like that. All these artists were there, and Marky Ramone got into an altercation with Johnny Lydon, Johnny Rotten, and something like, they were like going at it. She set the fuck down, and and then you got Duff McKagan and like Henry Rollins sitting there, kind of in between them, looking awkward. Rollins is trying to like video it on his iPhone, so they were not happy with each other. So there's certainly some tension there.
Yes, every punk rock band is indebted to their Ramones in some way, or form.
I think that's what Marky Ramone was trying to. If it wasn't for us, you wouldn't be anybody. Nobody would care about you, and So yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I just laugh at that because you got the strong New York accent mixed with the strong like London English accent, I should say, and so good stuff, guys. Well, Josh.